What if the Great Flood wasn't enough to wipe out the giants? Imagine this. After the waters receded and the earth was reborn, the Nephilim, those towering, mysterious beings, were seen again. How could this be? If the flood was meant to cleanse the world of their existence, why does the Bible suggest they returned? The story of the Great Flood is one of the most well-known narratives in human history. According to tradition, God unleashed the floodwaters to cleanse a corrupted world, a world tainted by violence and sin, much of it attributed to the Nephilim. These giants, described as the offspring of the sons of God and the daughters of men, were seen as abominations, beings who defied the natural order. The flood was meant to reset creation, wiping away every trace of these monstrous creatures and giving humanity a second chance. For centuries, this has been the accepted understanding. The Nephilim were gone, drowned in the deluge, never to return. But what if that's not the whole story? Hidden within the pages of the Bible are whispers of something unsettling, evidence that the Nephilim did not vanish completely. In Genesis 6:4, we read, "They were on the earth in those days, and also afterward. And when the Israelites spied out the land of Canaan, they reported seeing giants there, the very same Nephilim," in Numbers 13:33. How could this be? If the flood was designed to erase them from existence, how did they reappear? Did some survive the floodwaters? Or was their return tied to something even more mysterious, even more divine, or perhaps even more sinister? The answers lie buried in ancient texts, fragmented clues, and centuries of debate. But one thing is certain: the mystery of the Nephilim challenges everything we think we know about the aftermath of the Great Flood. To truly understand the mystery of the Nephilim, we must turn to the Bible itself, the very source of this enigmatic narrative. Two key verses stand out when examining the persistence of these giants after the Great Flood: Genesis 6:4 and Numbers 13:33. These passages not only raise profound questions, but also challenge the traditional understanding that the flood wiped the Nephilim from existence. Let's begin with Genesis 6:4. One of the most debated verses in Scripture. It states, "The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown." This verse introduces the Nephilim as the offspring of an unnatural union between the sons of God, often interpreted as fallen angels or divine beings, and human women. Their presence is described as a primary reason for humanity's corruption, which ultimately led to God's decision to send the flood. But here's where it gets intriguing. The text doesn't just say the Nephilim existed before the flood. It adds the phrase, "and also afterward." This small yet critical detail suggests that the Nephilim did not disappear entirely. They somehow resurfaced after the floodwaters receded. How could this be possible if the flood was meant to destroy all life, except for Noah, his family, and the animals aboard the ark? Now let's fast forward to Numbers 13:33. Centuries after the flood. Here, the Israelite spies sent by Moses to scout the land of Canaan report back with chilling words. "We saw the Nephilim there. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them." This account confirms that the Nephilim were alive and well long after the flood, living in the Promised Land, and striking fear into the hearts of those who encountered them. The spies' description paints a vivid picture of their immense size and overwhelming power, echoing the same dread associated with the pre-flood giants. But how could such beings exist in Canaan if the flood had supposedly eradicated them? Was their reappearance a result of survival, reproduction, or something else entirely? These two verses together create a theological and historical paradox. On one hand, the traditional view holds that the flood was a global catastrophe designed to obliterate sin and reset creation. If that's true, how do we reconcile the reappearance of the Nephilim? Were they somehow spared despite God's judgment? Or does their return suggest that the root cause of their existence, perhaps the union of supernatural beings and humans, continued even after the flood? Some scholars argue that Genesis 6:4's mention of afterward hints at ongoing divine rebellion, implying that the conditions that created the Nephilim persisted beyond the flood. Others suggest that Numbers 13:33 might reflect exaggeration or metaphor, but the consistency of the term Nephilim across both passages makes this interpretation less convincing. Instead, these verses point to a deeper mystery, the possibility that the flood, while catastrophic, did not fully address the spiritual forces behind the Nephilim's origins. Ultimately, these biblical accounts force us to confront uncomfortable questions about the nature of the flood, the extent of its reach, and the enduring influence of divine intervention, or interference, in human history. Did the flood fail to achieve its ultimate purpose? Or was the reappearance of the Nephilim part of a larger, more complex plan? Whatever the answer, the evidence from Scripture leaves no doubt. The Nephilim's story did not end with the flood. Their shadow looms over the pages of the Bible, challenging us to seek answers to one of history's greatest mysteries. The reappearance of the Nephilim after the Great Flood has puzzled scholars and theologians for centuries. To address this mystery, three main theories have emerged, each offering a unique perspective on how these giants could have returned. Let's explore them one by one, and as we do, consider which theory holds the most weight, or is the truth something even more extraordinary? 1. Noah may have carried Nephilim blood. One intriguing possibility comes from ancient texts, like the Genesis Apocryphon, part of the Dead Sea Scrolls. This theory suggests that Noah himself, or perhaps one of his descendants, may have carried traces of Nephilim blood. If true, this would mean the genetic legacy of the Nephilim survived through Noah's family aboard the ark. Could it be that humanity's fresh start wasn't entirely pure? Was Noah chosen because he was righteous despite having mixed ancestry? Or does this idea challenge our understanding of divine selection altogether? The implications are staggering. If the Nephilim's essence persisted in Noah's lineage, then the flood may not have been as absolute a reset as we once believed. 2. The local flood theory. Another compelling explanation questions the scope of the flood itself. What if the Great Flood wasn't global, but rather localized to a specific region? In this scenario, the Nephilim could have survived outside the flooded area, untouched by the waters of judgment. Ancient civilizations existed across vast regions, and some traditions describe other cultures flourishing beyond Mesopotamia during the time of the flood. Could the Nephilim have lived in these distant lands, far from the reach of God's wrath? If so, what does this mean about the universality of the flood narrative? Does it diminish its significance or deepen its complexity by tying it to geography and human history? This theory invites us to reconsider the boundaries of divine judgment and human survival. 3. Fallen angels repeated their sin. Perhaps the most controversial and unsettling theory is that fallen angels, often referred to as the Watchers, continued their rebellion after the flood by mating with human women once again. This idea finds support in certain interpretations of Scripture and apocryphal writings. which suggests that the sin described in Genesis 6:4 was repeated in later generations. If fallen angels defied God a second time, creating new Nephilim after the flood, it raises profound questions about free will, divine authority, and the persistence of evil. Why would God allow such an abomination to happen again? And if this theory is true, does it hint at a deeper struggle between good and evil, a cosmic battle playing out on Earth? Each of these theories challenges us to think critically about the biblical account and its mysteries. Did the Nephilim survive through Noah's bloodline? Did they escape the flood's reach in distant lands? Or were they reborn through renewed acts of rebellion by supernatural beings? While none of these explanations provides a definitive answer, they collectively paint a picture of a world still grappling with forces beyond human comprehension. So, which theory resonates with you, or could the truth lie somewhere in between? The idea that the Great Flood may not have been a global catastrophe, but rather a localized event, is one of the most thought-provoking theories in the debate over the Nephilim's reappearance. This perspective challenges the traditional interpretation of the flood narrative, while offering explanations rooted in historical and archaeological evidence. Could it be that the flood described in Genesis was a regional disaster, devastating a specific area rather than wiping out all life on Earth? Let's explore this theory in detail and consider how it might shed light on the survival of the Nephilim. A regional catastrophe. The Bible describes the flood as an overwhelming act of divine judgment, but nowhere does it explicitly state that the entire planet was submerged. Instead, the narrative focuses on the destruction of humanity and all living things within the known world at the time. For ancient peoples, their world likely consisted of the regions they inhabited, Mesopotamia and its surrounding areas. Geological and archaeological evidence supports the possibility of catastrophic flooding in these regions during early human history. One compelling example comes from the Black Sea deluge hypothesis, proposed by marine geologists William Ryan and Walter Pittman in the late 1990s. Their research suggests that around 5,600 BCE, melting glaciers caused the Mediterranean Sea to overflow into the Black Sea basin through what is now the Bosporus Strait. This event would have triggered massive flooding, inundating vast stretches of land and displacing countless people. To those living in the region, such a deluge would have seemed apocalyptic, a total destruction of their known world. Could this natural disaster have inspired the biblical account of the flood? Archaeological evidence of ancient floods. Beyond the Black Sea hypothesis, there are numerous examples of localized floods in ancient Mesopotamia that may have influenced the flood narrative. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers, which flow through modern-day Iraq, were prone to severe flooding due to seasonal rains and snowmelt. Archaeologists have uncovered sediment layers in ancient cities like Ur and Uruk that suggest widespread flooding occurred periodically. These events would have devastated local populations, leading to oral traditions and written accounts describing them as acts of divine judgment. For instance, the Sumerian Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the earliest flood stories predating the biblical account, also describes a great flood sent by the gods to destroy humanity. Scholars believe this tale reflects real-life flooding experienced by the Sumerians in southern Mesopotamia. If both the biblical and Sumerian accounts stem from similar historical events, it's plausible that the flood was a regional phenomenon rather than a global one. Implications for the Nephilim. If the flood was indeed localized, it opens up the possibility that the Nephilim survived outside the affected region. Ancient civilizations existed across vast areas of the Near East, Africa, and Asia during the time traditionally associated with Noah. For example, Egyptian and Indus Valley civilizations flourished contemporaneously with Mesopotamian cultures. If the Nephilim lived beyond the flood zone, their survival becomes far less mysterious. Moreover, the localized flood theory aligns with the biblical mention of the Nephilim being present afterward. Genesis 6:4. If only a portion of humanity was wiped out, remnants of the pre-flood world, including the Nephilim, could have persisted elsewhere. This raises fascinating questions. Were the Nephilim part of distant tribes or nations untouched by the flood? Could their continued existence explain why the Israelite spies encountered them centuries later in Canaan? Rethinking the scope of the flood. While the localized flood theory challenges long-held assumptions about the universality of the flood, it doesn't diminish its significance. On the contrary, it invites us to view the story through the lens of ancient human experience, where even regional disasters could feel like the end of the world. By grounding the flood narrative in historical and geological realities, we gain a deeper appreciation for its enduring power and for the mysteries it leaves behind. So, was the Great Flood truly global, or was it a catastrophic yet contained event? And if the latter is true, how does this reshape our understanding of the Nephilim's survival? The answers remain elusive, but the evidence suggests that the truth may lie somewhere between myth and history, faith and science. One of the most controversial yet compelling theories about the reappearance of the Nephilim after the Great Flood centers on the idea that fallen angels, often referred to as the Watchers, continued their rebellion by mating with human women once again. This theory suggests that the same divine transgression described in Genesis 6:4, where the sons of God mated with the daughters of men, was repeated after the flood, giving rise to a new generation of Nephilim. While this concept challenges traditional interpretations of Scripture, it finds support in ancient texts like the Book of Enoch and fragments from the Dead Sea Scrolls, offering a glimpse into the enduring struggle between good and evil. The Watchers and their sin. The Bible's brief mention of the sons of God in Genesis 6:4 has long been interpreted as a reference to fallen angels who defied God by engaging in unnatural unions with human women. These unions produced the Nephilim, beings of immense size and power, who corrupted the earth and contributed to humanity's downfall. The flood was meant to cleanse the world of this abomination. But what if the root cause, the sin of the Watchers, was not eradicated? The Book of Enoch, an apocryphal text written around the 3rd century BCE, provides a detailed account of these events. According to Enoch, the Watchers were a group of 200 angels, led by leaders such as Shemihaza and Azazel. They descended to earth, taught forbidden knowledge to humans, such as weapon-making and sorcery, and fathered the Nephilim. Enoch describes how their actions brought chaos to the world, prompting God to send the flood as judgment. However, Enoch also hints at the persistence of their influence, suggesting that the Watchers' rebellion did not end with the flood. Could they have returned to repeat their sin, creating new Nephilim in the post-flood world? Evidence from the Dead Sea Scrolls. Fragments of the Book of Giants, part of the Dead Sea Scrolls, further corroborate this theory. The Book of Giants expands on the story of the Nephilim, describing their violent tendencies and eventual destruction in the flood. Yet, intriguingly, it also implies that their lineage or legacy endured beyond the floodwaters. Some scholars interpret these texts as evidence that the Watchers' defiance continued, leading to renewed attempts to corrupt humanity through similar means. If true, this would explain why the Israelite spies encountered Nephilim in Canaan centuries later. Numbers 13:33. Biblical hints at ongoing rebellion. While the canonical Bible does not explicitly state that fallen angels mated with humans after the flood, subtle clues suggest the possibility. For instance, Genesis 6:4 mentions that the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward. The phrase afterward is ambiguous, but could imply that the conditions leading to the Nephilim's existence persisted beyond the flood. Additionally, Jude 1:6 refers to angels who abandoned their proper dwelling and are now held in chains for judgment. Many theologians connect this verse to the Watchers, arguing that their punishment reflects ongoing consequences for their rebellion, including potential involvement in creating more Nephilim. A cosmic battle continues. If this theory is correct, it paints a sobering picture of a world still under siege by dark spiritual forces. The reappearance of the Nephilim becomes not just a historical anomaly, but a sign of persistent divine conflict. Why would God allow such a thing to happen again? Does this theory suggest that free will extends even to celestial beings, enabling them to defy Him repeatedly? Or is there a deeper purpose behind allowing humanity to face these trials? The Watcher theory challenges us to consider the broader implications of the Nephilim's return. It invites us to see the biblical narrative not merely as a linear story of redemption, but as part of an ongoing cosmic battle, a struggle between light and darkness, purity and corruption. By drawing on texts like the Book of Enoch and the Dead Sea Scrolls, we gain a richer understanding of the complex interplay between the spiritual and physical realms. So, were the Nephilim reborn through the continued rebellion of fallen angels? And if so, what does this reveal about the nature of evil and God's plan for humanity? While definitive answers remain elusive, the evidence points to a mystery far greater than the sum of its parts, one that continues to captivate believers and scholars alike. The practice of head coverings for women, as described in 1 Corinthians 11:2-16, has long been a topic of theological debate. While many interpretations focus on cultural norms, gender roles, or expressions of submission to authority, some scholars propose a more provocative and ancient connection, one that ties this practice to the Nephilim and the sins of fallen angels. Could the act of veiling be rooted in an effort to protect women from celestial temptation? Let's explore this intriguing theory and its implications. Head coverings as a symbol of protection. In 1 Corinthians 11, Paul discusses the importance of head coverings during prayer and prophecy, emphasizing their symbolic significance. He writes in verse 10, "For this reason, and because of the angels, the woman ought to have a sign of authority on her head." This enigmatic phrase, "because of the angels," has puzzled theologians for centuries. What exactly does it mean? Some scholars suggest that Paul is referencing ancient Jewish traditions about the Watchers, the fallen angels who lusted after human women and fathered the Nephilim. Genesis 6:2. According to texts like the Book of Enoch, these angels were drawn to the beauty and allure of human women, leading them to abandon heaven and commit acts of rebellion. If this interpretation is correct, the head covering may have served as a protective measure, a way to shield women from becoming objects of angelic lust once again. By veiling their hair, which was considered a source of feminine beauty, women could avoid drawing unwanted attention from supernatural beings. Historical context, angels and human fertility. To understand this perspective, we must consider how ancient cultures viewed fertility, beauty, and divine interaction. In biblical times, hair was often associated with sensuality and reproductive power. For example, in the story of Samson, Judges 13-16, his uncut hair symbolized his strength and covenant with God. Similarly, unveiled hair in public settings might have been seen as provocative or alluring, not just to men, but potentially to other worldly entities. The Book of Jubilees, another apocryphal text, reinforces this idea by warning against exposing oneself to spiritual danger. It recounts how the Watchers were captivated by human women's physical beauty, leading to their downfall and corruption of the earth. Drawing from this tradition, early Christian communities may have adopted head coverings not only as a cultural norm, but also as a safeguard against repeating the mistakes of the past. By concealing their beauty, women could prevent themselves from becoming entangled in divine rebellion, or worse, instruments of chaos, like those who gave birth to the Nephilim. Why this matters in the post-flood world. If the Nephilim reappeared after the flood due to renewed unions between fallen angels and human women, the need for protection would have taken on even greater urgency. The reappearance of these giants suggests that the sin of the Watchers was not confined to the pre-flood era. It persisted as a lingering threat. In this context, the head covering becomes more than a religious ritual. It becomes a spiritual defense mechanism. Paul's mention of the angels in 1 Corinthians 11:10 takes on new meaning when viewed through this lens. Rather than referring solely to holy angels observing worship practices, he may also be cautioning against the dangers posed by fallen angels. His instruction could reflect a belief that humanity must remain vigilant against supernatural interference, particularly in matters of procreation and purity. A deeper spiritual lesson. This interpretation raises profound questions about the intersection of the physical and spiritual realms. Were women seen as especially vulnerable to celestial temptation because of their role in bearing children? And if so, what does this reveal about God's design for humanity amidst ongoing cosmic conflict? While modern readers might find this explanation far-fetched, it aligns with ancient fears about the fragility of human existence in a world influenced by both divine and demonic forces. The head covering, then, becomes a powerful reminder of humanity's need for humility and protection in the face of powers beyond our control. Ultimately, whether or not Paul intended this specific meaning, the connection between head coverings and the Nephilim underscores a timeless truth. Evil seeks to corrupt what is good, and vigilance is essential. By exploring this theory, we gain a deeper appreciation for the layers of meaning embedded in Scripture, and for the enduring mystery of how the divine and human intersect. So, could something as simple as a veil hold the key to understanding humanity's place in a universe still touched by rebellion? The answer lies somewhere in the shadows of history and faith. The reappearance of the Nephilim after the Great Flood remains one of the most perplexing mysteries in biblical and historical study. Throughout this exploration, we've examined several compelling theories that attempt to explain how these giants could have returned, despite the flood's intended purpose of cleansing the earth. First, we considered the possibility that Noah or his descendants carried traces of Nephilim blood, suggesting that their lineage survived through humanity's chosen remnant. This theory challenges the purity of Noah's family and raises questions about whether God's plan included a partial reset rather than a complete eradication of the Nephilim's influence. Next, we explored the idea of a unlocalized flood, proposing that the deluge was not global but regional, leaving room for the Nephilim to survive in distant lands untouched by the waters. This perspective aligns with geological and archaeological evidence of catastrophic flooding in specific areas, offering a plausible explanation for their continued existence outside the flood zone. Finally, we delved into the controversial theory that fallen angels, or the Watchers, repeated their sin after the flood by mating with human women once again. Drawing from texts like the Book of Enoch and hints in Scripture, this theory suggests that the root cause of the Nephilim's existence, divine rebellion, persisted even after the floodwaters receded. If true, it paints a sobering picture of an ongoing cosmic struggle between good and evil. Yet, despite these thought-provoking explanations, none provide a definitive answer. The Bible itself leaves the question open-ended, mentioning the Nephilim both before and after the flood, without elaborating on how they returned. Was it through genetic legacy, geographic survival, or renewed angelic transgression? Or is the truth a combination of these theories, or something entirely different? This enduring mystery invites us to wrestle with profound questions. What does the reappearance of the Nephilim reveal about the resilience of sin and corruption in the world? How should we understand the interplay between divine judgment and human free will? And what lessons can we draw from this ancient enigma as we navigate our own place in a complex, often chaotic universe? Ultimately, the story of the Nephilim reminds us that some mysteries resist easy answers, calling us to deeper study, reflection, and faith. So, where do you stand on this debate? Could the key to unlocking this mystery lie hidden in ancient texts, archaeological discoveries, or fresh interpretations of Scripture? The journey to uncover the truth is far from over, and it begins with your curiosity. The mystery of the Nephilim is a story that bridges theology, history, and imagination. From their presence before the flood to their unexpected return afterward, these giants challenge our understanding of divine judgment, human resilience, and the unseen forces that shape our world. Whether their reappearance was due to lingering bloodlines, a localized flood, or the continued rebellion of fallen angels, one thing is clear: the Nephilim remain a symbol of unanswered questions and timeless fascination. So, which theory do you find most compelling? Do you believe Noah's family carried their legacy, that they survived in distant lands, or that celestial beings defied God once again? The debate is far from settled, and your perspective could add valuable insight to this ancient enigma. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think really happened? Or perhaps this is the start of your own journey into the depths of biblical mysteries. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and who knows? Maybe you'll uncover a clue that brings us closer to the truth.